They rehearsed the vows. They picked the colors. Her father, a respected pastor, stood ready to bless the marriage. Everything was perfect, until a sound cut through the ceremony. Guests whispering, phones lighting up, a video playing somewhere in the crowd. And the groom, standing at the altar, suddenly felt every eye shift toward him. What happened next would not only destroy the ceremony, it would expose secrets 6 years buried, unravel friendships, break families apart, and ignite a chain of events no one at that church could have imagined. Some weddings end with a kiss. This one ended with a question. Who sent that video, and why now? Welcome to True Crime Story HQ. Thanks to all my viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay tuned for daily true crime updates. Don't forget to subscribe. Brandon Nash was 29 years old when he stood at that altar. To everyone who knew him, he was a real estate agent trying to make it in Atlanta. Clean-cut, respectful. The kind of man who showed up to church every Sunday and volunteered when the community needed help. He had the look of someone building a future, and people believed in him. They saw ambition. They saw dedication. They saw a man who knew where he was going. But 6 years before that wedding day, Brandon was living a completely different life. A life most people in that church would never understand. A life he worked incredibly hard to erase. A life that existed in shadows behind closed doors, in places where names didn't matter and faces were quickly forgotten. He was a stripper. Not in the clubs you see advertised on billboards or featured in movies. These were underground venues. High-end, private, exclusive. Places where anonymity mattered more than anything else. Where clients paid extra for discretion. Where performers used stage names and never revealed their real identities. And they weren't just any clubs. They were gay clubs. Brandon performed for men. He danced for them. He entertained them. He let them pay him to be whatever fantasy they needed for the night. The truth is, Brandon has always been bisexual. That's a part of himself he's always known. But it's also a part he learned to hide early in life. Growing up in a religious community meant keeping certain truths buried deep. He knew what people would say if they found out. He knew how they would look at him. He knew the judgment that would follow. So he kept it quiet. He played the part people expected. He dated women publicly. He nodded along during church sermons about traditional values. He learned to compartmentalize his identity into acceptable pieces. And when he finally left that world behind, the clubs, the performances, the late nights, he made absolutely sure no trace of it followed him. He deleted every social media account connected to that life. He changed his phone number. He cut ties with people who knew him back then. He even changed the way he dressed, the way he carried himself. He became someone new, someone clean, someone respectable. But why did he even start stripping in the first place? The answer isn't as simple as curiosity or rebellion. It's not about wanting attention or craving a certain lifestyle. The answer is survival. Brandon's real estate career wasn't taking off the way he hoped it would. He'd just gotten his license a year earlier. He was doing everything right, attending open houses, cold calling potential clients, networking at events, putting in the work. But the big sales weren't coming. Not yet. Real estate is a game of patience, and Brandon was running out of time. His rent was piling up. He was 2 months behind. His landlord had already slid eviction notices under his door twice. Brandon would come home from showing properties all day and stare at those notices on his kitchen counter, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on him. He had a college degree. He had ambition. He had plans. But none of that mattered when you couldn't pay your bills. Then his sister got sick. She was the only family Brandon had left. Their parents died in a car accident when Brandon was 19 and his sister was 17. It was just the two of them after that. They looked out for each other. When Brandon moved to Atlanta to start his real estate career, his sister stayed behind to finish nursing school. They talked every week. They visited when they could. They were all each other had. Then she called one night and told him she needed surgery. Something with her kidneys. Something serious. The doctor said it couldn't wait. Insurance would cover part of it, but not all of it. Not even close. The out-of-pocket cost was going to be over $15,000. Brandon didn't have $1,500, let alone 15,000. He panicked. He called every bank. He applied for loans. He asked friends if they knew anyone hiring. He even considered selling his car, but he needed it for work. He was desperate. And desperation makes you consider options you would never think about otherwise. That's when a guy he knew from the gym mentioned the clubs. He said they paid well. He said it was easy money if you had the body for it. He said Brandon could make a few thousand in a weekend if he was willing to put himself out there. Brandon didn't want to do it, but his sister needed that surgery, and he didn't have any other options. So he walked into one of those clubs on a Thursday night and asked if they were hiring. The manager looked him up and down, asked him to take off his shirt, and hired him on the spot. Brandon started performing that weekend. It was uncomfortable at first. The lights, the music, the eyes watching him from every corner of the room. But the money was real. He made $800 his first night. By the end of the first month, he had enough to cover his sister's surgery and catch up on his rent. He told himself it was temporary, just until he got back on his feet, just until real estate started paying off. But temporary turned into 6 months, then a year, then longer. The money was good, too good to walk away from, and somewhere along the way, he stopped feeling uncomfortable. He got used to it. He even started to enjoy parts of it, the attention, the control, the way people looked at him like he was someone worth paying for. That's when he met Williams Bowman. Williams wasn't a performer. He was a regular, a patron, someone who came in every weekend without fail. He always sat in the same section, always tipped well, always watched Brandon a little longer than the others. At first, Brandon didn't think much of it. Regulars were common. They had their favorite performers. It was part of the business. But then Williams started talking to him. It started small. A compliment after a performance. A drink sent to Brandon's table during his break. Then one night, Williams waited for Brandon after his shift and asked if he wanted to grab food. Brandon was tired. He was hungry. He said yes. They went to a diner a few blocks away. They talked for hours. Williams was charming in a way that felt effortless. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't treat Brandon like a transaction. He talked about life, about struggles, about dreams that didn't work out the way they were supposed to. Brandon found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told Williams things he hadn't told anyone, about his parents, about his sister, about feeling stuck between two versions of himself. Williams listened. He didn't judge. He didn't offer hollow advice. He just listened. And for Brandon, that felt rare. It felt real. They started spending more time together. Coffee during the day, dinner after Brandon's shifts, long conversations that stretched into the early morning. What started as friendship became something more. They got involved. It wasn't a relationship in the traditional sense. They never called it that. But it was intimate, physical, emotional. For 3 months, they were entangled in something Brandon didn't fully understand, but didn't resist either. Williams made him feel seen, not as a performer, not as someone trying to survive, just as Brandon, and that feeling was intoxicating. But then something shifted. Brandon started to notice things, the way Williams would get quiet when Brandon mentioned wanting to leave the clubs, the way he would change the subject when Brandon talked about his real estate career taking off, the way he would show up unannounced at Brandon's apartment, even when Brandon said he needed space. It was subtle at first, easy to ignore, but it was there. And then there was the physical part. What used to feel exciting started to feel routine, then obligatory, then empty. Brandon realized he wasn't getting anything out of it anymore. He wasn't satisfied. He wasn't fulfilled. He was just going through the motions because it was easier than ending it. So one night after Williams stayed over, Brandon told him they needed to talk. He said it as gently as he could. He said he cared about Williams. He said he appreciated everything they shared. But he also said he wasn't happy anymore. He said he wanted something different, something that could actually build into a future. He said he needed to end the intimacy between them, but they could remain friends, best of friends. Williams took it better than Brandon expected. He didn't get angry. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just nodded and said he understood. He said it was probably just experimentation anyway. Brandon believed him. He had no reason not to. They stayed in touch after that. William still came to the clubs occasionally, but he didn't sit in Brandon's section anymore. They texted every few weeks. They met up for lunch once or twice. On the surface, everything seemed fine. Williams acted like he had moved on, like it didn't bother him, like they were just two friends who used to be something more. But you don't forget your first love, and Williams never did. Years passed. Brandon got his big break in real estate. He sold a commercial property to a tech company relocating to Atlanta. The commission was enough to change everything. He paid off his debts. He moved into a better apartment. He started attending church regularly. He volunteered at community events. He became the version of himself he always wanted to be. Only one person knew the full truth about Brandon's past, Williams Bowman. He had seen every part of it. He had been there. He had been part of it. And unlike Brandon, he hadn't moved on. He hadn't forgotten. He was still holding on to memories, holding on to feelings, holding on to proof. Brandon thought his past was buried. He thought he could move forward without looking back. He thought the person he used to be had no power over the person he was becoming. But secrets don't stay hidden when someone else holds the key. And Williams was holding more than just memories. He was holding footage. He was holding leverage. And he was waiting for the right moment to use it. Before you continue, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. If this case is already gripping you, share it with someone who loves true crime as much as you do. Now, let's keep going. Kiara Cole was 27 years old, and everything about her life reflected order. Purpose. She taught second grade at an elementary school in Atlanta. Her classroom was bright and organized. Her students loved her because she was patient and kind. Parents respected her because she genuinely cared about their children's progress. She had the kind of presence that made people feel safe, calm, trustworthy. But more than anything, Kiara was known as the pastor's daughter. Her father, Job Cole, was the head pastor at their church. It wasn't a small congregation. Over 300 people filled those pews every Sunday. Some drove from neighboring towns just to hear him preach. Pastor Cole had a reputation that extended far beyond the church walls. He was a voice in the community, a leader. People came to him for guidance, for counseling, for prayer when their lives fell apart. His sermons were powerful. His words carried authority. His influence was undeniable. Kiara's mother, Daniela Cole, ran the women's ministry at the church. She organized events, led Bible studies, mentored younger women navigating marriage and motherhood. She was the kind of woman who could organize a fundraiser for 200 people in a week and still have time to visit sick members of the congregation. The Cole family wasn't just a family. They were a pillar, a standard, a model of what faith and dedication were supposed to look like. Kiara was raised to uphold that image. From the time she was a little girl, she understood that her actions reflected on her family, on the church, on everything her parents had built. She didn't date casually. She didn't go to clubs. She didn't post questionable photos on social media. She didn't do anything that would embarrass her family or tarnish the reputation her father had spent decades building. Every relationship she entered was scrutinized. Every man she brought home had to meet a certain standard. He had to be respectful, employed, faithful, committed to God, and most importantly, he had to have her father's approval. Most men didn't make it past the first dinner. Some couldn't handle the pressure. Others couldn't meet the expectations. A few just weren't interested in dating someone whose entire family had a say in the relationship. Kiara didn't mind. She believed in her family's values. She believed in doing things the right way. She believed that waiting for the right person was worth it. And she believed that when the right man came along, everything would fall into place naturally. Then she met Brandon Nash. The church was hosting a charity event to help displaced families find housing. There had been a series of evictions in a low-income neighborhood nearby, and the church wanted to step in and provide resources. Kiara's father announced the event during Sunday service and asked for volunteers. Brandon had only been attending the same church Kiara's father was presiding. He was trying to get more involved in the community, trying to build connections, trying to become the kind of person people respected. So when he heard about the event, he signed up immediately. He was assigned to handle outreach. His job was to coordinate with local real estate agents, connect displaced families with landlords who were willing to work with them, and make sure everyone had access to the resources they needed. It was the kind of work Brandon was good at. He knew the real estate market. He knew how to talk to people. He knew how to make things happen. Kiara was in charge of organizing donations, furniture, clothes, household items, school supplies. She spent weeks collecting donations from church members and local businesses. On the day of the event, she was running around the church hall, directing volunteers, making sure everything was labeled and organized, answering questions, solving problems. That's when she noticed Brandon. He was standing near the registration table with a clipboard, talking to a family who had just walked in. He was focused, professional. He wasn't there to be seen or to make an impression. He was there to help. And something about that caught her attention. They didn't talk much that day. Just a few brief exchanges about logistics. But Kiara noticed the way he handled people, the way he listened when they spoke, the way he followed through on what he said he would do. By the end of the event, she was curious. A few days later, Brandon asked if he could take her to lunch. He said he wanted to talk about organizing another event. Kiara hesitated. She didn't know him well. She didn't know if this was about work or something else. But she agreed, with one condition. It wouldn't just be the two of them. Her family would need to meet him first. Brandon didn't flinch. He didn't get defensive. He didn't try to convince her otherwise. He just said he understood and asked when would be a good time to meet her parents. That impressed her. The first dinner at the Cole house was exactly what you'd expect. Pastor Job asked Brandon about his background, his career, his relationship with God. Daniela asked about his family, his values, his intentions. Kiara sat quietly and watched how he handled the pressure. Some men crumbled under her father's questioning. They got nervous. They gave vague answers. They tried to say what they thought the pastor wanted to hear. Brandon didn't do that. He was honest. He told them he grew up in a Christian household but drifted away for a while. He said he was working to rebuild his faith. He said he wasn't perfect, but he was trying to be better every day. He talked about his real estate career, about his goals, about wanting to build something meaningful with his life. Pastor Job didn't give his approval that night, but he didn't say no either. He told Brandon he could come back. And that was enough. Brandon came back, again and again. He showed up to family dinners. He attended Bible study. He sat with the Cole family during Sunday service. He volunteered at church events. He asked Pastor Job questions about faith and listened to the answers. He treated Kiara with respect. He didn't push for more than she was ready to give. He was patient, consistent, reliable. Their courtship was traditional in every sense. Supervised dates, no physical intimacy, conversations about values and goals and what they both wanted from life. Kiara appreciated that. She appreciated that Brandon understood the importance of doing things the right way. She appreciated that he wasn't trying to rush anything. After 18 months, Brandon proposed. He didn't do it privately. He didn't take her to a fancy restaurant or a scenic overlook. He did it in front of her entire family during Sunday service. He got down on one knee right there in the church, in front of 300 witnesses, and asked Kiara to marry him. Pastor Cole smiled. Daniela cried. The congregation erupted in applause. Kiara said yes. The wedding planning started immediately. Daniela took charge of most of the details. She booked the reception hall. She coordinated with the caterer. She helped Kiara pick out her dress. 200 guests were invited. Family members from out of state made travel arrangements. The honeymoon was planned for Turks and Caicos. Everything was coming together. Everything felt perfect. But there was something Kiara didn't know. Something Brandon never told her. Not about the stripping. Not about the clubs. Not about Williams. Brandon convinced himself it didn't matter. That was a different version of him. A different life. a chapter that was closed and locked. He didn't think of it as lying. He thought of it as protecting her, protecting what they were building together. He believed that some things were better left in the past, that sharing every detail of who he used to be would only create unnecessary pain. So he kept it to himself. Williams Bowman was always around during this time. Brandon had introduced him as his best friend early in the relationship. He said they'd known each other for years. He said Williams was like a brother to him. Kiara had no reason to question it. Williams played the part perfectly. He helped with wedding logistics. He showed up to family dinners when Brandon invited him. He smiled at all the right moments. He congratulated them on their engagement. He offered to be the best man before Brandon even asked. Kiara liked him. She thought he was kind, supportive, a good friend to Brandon. She even told Brandon once that he was lucky to have someone like Williams in his life. Someone loyal, someone who genuinely cared about him. But if anyone had looked closer, really looked, they would have noticed something. The way Williams watched Brandon and Kiara together. The way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes when they talked about their future. The way he lingered in conversations just a little too long, like he was waiting for something. The way he would glance at Brandon when no one else was looking, with an expression that wasn't quite affection and wasn't quite anger. He wasn't watching like a friend. He was watching like someone witnessing a theft. Like someone who believed something was being taken from him. Like someone who was waiting for the right moment to take it back. June 14th, a Saturday afternoon. The sky was clear and blue. The sun was bright but not too hot. It was perfect wedding weather. The church was packed. 200 guests filled every pew. Family members who traveled from different states. Friends who took time off work to be there. Church members who had watched Kiara grow up and wanted to witness this moment. This wasn't just a wedding. It was an event. A celebration of everything the Cole family represented. A union that felt like it was blessed from the beginning. Brandon stood at the altar in a charcoal tuxedo. The fabric fit perfectly. His tie was straight. His shoes were polished. His hands were folded in front of him. But if you looked closely, you could see them trembling slightly. He looked calm on the surface, but inside, his heart was racing. This was it. The moment he'd been working toward for 2 years. The moment that would officially make him part of this family, part of this community, part of something bigger than himself. Williams Bowman stood beside him as the best man. He was dressed in a matching tuxedo. His posture was relaxed. He smiled at the guests as they filed in. He nodded at people he recognized from previous church events. To everyone watching, he looked like the perfect friend. Supportive, happy for the groom, proud to be standing beside him on such an important day. But inside, Williams was anything but calm. He had spent weeks planning this moment, weeks making sure everything was in place, weeks preparing for the outcome he knew was coming. He wasn't standing at that altar to support Brandon. He was standing there to watch everything fall apart. The music started. The organist played the traditional wedding march. The doors at the back of the church opened. Kiara appeared. She wore a custom gown that had taken months to design. Lace sleeves, a fitted bodice, a cathedral train that stretched behind her and required 2 bridesmaids to carry. Her hair was styled in soft curls. Her makeup was flawless. Her bouquet of white roses shook slightly in her hands, but it was nerves. Good nerves. The kind you feel when you're about to step into the future you've always dreamed of. Her father, Pastor Job Cole, walked beside her with his arm around hers. He was dressed in a black suit with a white clergy collar. He looked proud, honored, ready to officiate the wedding of his only daughter. This wasn't just any ceremony for him. This was personal. This was family. Kiara walked slowly down the aisle. She made eye contact with friends and family as she passed. She smiled. She took deep breaths to keep herself from crying too early. She looked at Brandon standing at the altar, and everything felt right. Everything felt like it was supposed to. The ceremony began. The choir sang a hymn about love and commitment. Prayers were spoken over the couple. Pastor Cole stood in front of Brandon and Kiara and opened his Bible. He began talking about covenant, about the sanctity of marriage, about building a life rooted in faith and trust. His voice echoed through the church. Every word carried weight. Every sentence felt intentional. He talked about how marriage wasn't just a union between two people. It was a union before God, a promise that required honesty, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment. He talked about how the foundation of any strong marriage was truth, how you couldn't build something lasting on a foundation of secrets. Brandon stood there listening. His hands were sweating. His throat felt tight. He told himself everything was fine. He told himself his past didn't matter. He told himself this moment was all that mattered. Then it happened. A notification sound, just one at first. A phone buzzing somewhere in the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was noticeable. A few people glanced around annoyed. Church etiquette meant phones should be on silent during a ceremony. But then another phone buzzed. Then another. Then 5 more. Then 10. Then 20. Guests started pulling out their phones. Confusion spread across their faces. Some frowned. Some looked shocked. Some covered their mouths. The whispers started low, but they grew louder. People leaned over to show their screens to the person sitting next to them. More gasps. More shocked expressions. Someone had sent a mass text to nearly everyone in that church. The message had no words, just a link to a video, and people were clicking it. Daniela Cole was sitting in the front row. She wore a lavender dress and a matching hat. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, irritated that someone would text during her daughter's wedding. She opened the message. She saw the link. She clicked it without thinking. Her face went pale. Her hand started shaking. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked briskly toward her husband at the altar. She leaned in close and whispered something urgent. Something that made Pastor Cole stop mid-sentence. She showed him her phone. Pastor Cole stared at the screen. His face hardened. His jaw clenched. The Bible in his hands closed with a snap. He looked up at Brandon, and for the first time since they met, there was no warmth in his eyes. No acceptance. No approval. Only disgust. Kiara still didn't understand. She was standing there in her wedding gown, holding her bouquet, smiling, waiting for her father to continue. She saw her mother's face. She saw her father's reaction. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Pastor Cole leaned down and whispered something to her. Kiara's smile faded. He handed her the phone. Kiara looked at the screen. 5 seconds. That's all it took. 5 seconds for her entire world to collapse. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor. The white roses scattered across the altar. Her knees buckled. She grabbed onto her father's arm to keep from falling. Bridesmaids rushed forward to catch her before she collapsed completely. The video was playing on nearly every phone in that church. Brandon, 6 years younger, shirtless on a stage in a dimly lit club. The lighting was red and purple. The music was loud. He was dancing. Not the kind of dancing you do at a wedding. The kind of dancing that's meant to seduce, to entertain, to make people pay. He was dancing on a man sitting in a chair, grinding against him. The man's hands were on Brandon's waist. Brandon leaned down and kissed him. Not a peck, not a friendly gesture. A real kiss. Passionate. Explicit. Bills were being thrown at him from the crowd. The camera zoomed in on his face. There was no mistaking who it was. The video continued. Brandon moved to the pole on stage. He spun around it. He removed his belt. He tossed it into the crowd. The audience in the video cheered. More bills were thrown. Brandon smiled. He was good at it, confident, comfortable. This wasn't his first time. This wasn't even close to his first time. The video was 30 seconds long, but 30 seconds was enough. It was undeniable. It was explicit, and it was being watched by everyone Brandon loved, everyone Kiara trusted, everyone Pastor Cole had invited to witness this sacred union. Brandon tried to speak. His voice cracked. "I can explain." Pastor Cole raised his hand, cutting him off. His voice was cold, controlled, firm. Every word was deliberate. "You are of the world. You cannot marry my daughter." Kiara was being carried out by her mother and bridesmaids. She was sobbing, hyperventilating. Her body shook as they guided her through the side door of the church. Her dress dragged behind her, the train getting caught on chairs as they moved. She kept repeating the same words over and over. "No, no, no." The ceremony was over. There was no announcement, no formal dismissal. People just started leaving. Some whispered to each other as they walked down the aisle. Some stared at Brandon as they passed. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some looked angry. Some looked hurt. Some looked disgusted. Within 10 minutes, the church was nearly empty. The flowers were still in place. The candles were still lit. The organist was still sitting at the organ, unsure of what to do. But the guests were gone. The family was gone. The bride was gone. Brandon stood alone at the altar. His tuxedo felt too tight. His chest felt heavy. He couldn't breathe properly. His life was imploding in real time. Everything he built, everything he worked for, everything he convinced himself was safe, gone, destroyed, exposed, in front of 200 witnesses. But who sent that video? And why wait until this exact moment to destroy him? Brandon left the church in a daze. His legs moved, but he didn't remember telling them to. His hands hung at his sides, useless. His mind was blank. Not empty. Blank. Like someone had taken an eraser and wiped away everything he thought he knew about his life. The tuxedo he'd spent weeks picking out felt like a costume now. A joke. A reminder of how stupid he'd been to think he could outrun his past. Brandon stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Where do you go when your entire life collapses in front of 200 people? Where do you go when the woman you love can't even look at you? Then he heard a voice behind him. "Come on, I'll drive you home." Williams. Brandon turned slowly. Williams was standing a few feet away, car keys in his hand, his expression neutral. He looked the same as he had an hour ago. Calm, composed, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just watched Brandon's life fall apart. Brandon wanted to say no, wanted to tell Williams to leave him alone, but he didn't have his car. He'd ridden to the church with Kiara's family that morning, part of the tradition. The groom wasn't supposed to see the bride before the ceremony, so his car was still at his apartment, 15 miles away. He didn't have the energy to call a ride, didn't have the energy to argue, so he just nodded and walked toward Williams's car. The first 10 minutes of the drive were silent. Brandon stared out the window, watching the city pass by. The streets were busy, people going about their Saturday, shopping, eating, living normal lives, lives that hadn't just been destroyed in front of everyone they knew. Williams drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes on the road. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't try to comfort Brandon, didn't apologize. He just drove. But then something started to creep into Brandon's mind. A thought. Small at first, easy to dismiss, but it grew louder the longer he sat there in silence. The video. Who had access to it? Brandon had taken that video himself years ago. A client had paid extra for private content, custom footage he could keep. Brandon filmed it on his phone, sent it to the client, then deleted it immediately. He never kept copies, never posted it anywhere, never shared it with anyone. Except Williams had borrowed his phone once. It was about a year after they'd ended things. Williams's phone had died during a night out, and he needed to make a call. Brandon handed him his phone without thinking. Williams stepped outside to make the call, came back 10 minutes later, thanked him, and that was it. Brandon never thought about it again. Until now. His heart started pounding. His hands started shaking. He turned slowly to look at Williams. Why? Williams kept driving. Didn't react. Didn't even glance over. Brandon's voice got louder. No one else had that video. Only you. Williams's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched. But he still didn't answer. Why did you do it? Williams pulled over abruptly. The car jerked to the side of the road, tires scraping against the curb. He put the car in park and turned to face Brandon. And for the first time since they left the church, his expression changed. The calm mask slipped. Something raw showed through. "She would never understand your nature," Williams said. His voice was composed, but there was something underneath it, something that had been building for years. "You were lying to her. I did you a favor." Brandon stared at him. "A favor? You humiliated me in front of everyone I love." "You humiliated yourself," William shot back, "when you chose her over what we had." Brandon felt like he'd been punched in the chest. "This was never about protecting me. This was about you." "Of course it was about me." Williams's voice cracked. He wasn't calm anymore. He was angry, hurt, desperate. "You think you can just walk away from me? Marry some woman and pretend I never existed? Pretend what we had didn't matter?" Brandon shook his head. "We ended that 6 years ago. You said you were fine with it. You said it was just experimentation." "I lied." Williams said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "I've been lying this whole time, smiling at your dinners, congratulating you on your engagement, standing next to you at that altar. All of it was a lie." Brandon couldn't breathe. His chest felt tight, his vision blurred. "So you destroyed my wedding? You destroyed my relationship? Because you were jealous?" "I wasn't jealous," Williams said. "I was trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. She doesn't know you. Not like I do. She doesn't accept you. Not like I do. You don't know what she would have done if I'd told her the truth." "Yes, I do." Williams leaned closer. "Did you see her face today? That's what she thinks of you. That's who she really is. She's just like the rest of them, judgmental, narrow-minded. She would have left you eventually. I just sped up the process." Brandon felt rage building inside him. Pure, burning rage. "You didn't do this for me. You did it because you can't stand the thought of me being happy with someone else." Williams didn't deny it. He just stared at Brandon with this look, this desperate, possessive look that made Brandon realize how deep this went. How long Williams had been holding on to this. How much he'd been hiding. "You think she loves you?" Williams asked. "She loves the version of you that you showed her. The fake version. The one who goes to church and smiles and pretends he's never done anything wrong. But I know the real you. I've seen the real you, and I love that version." "That's not love," Brandon said. His voice was shaking. "That's obsession." Williams flinched. For just a second, something flashed across his face. Hurt. But then it was gone, replaced by anger. "I've waited 6 years for you to come back to me. 6 years of watching you pretend to be someone you're not. 6 years of watching you build a life with someone who will never understand you. And I'm done waiting." Brandon reached for the door handle. "We're done. You and me. Whatever friendship we had, it's over." He opened the door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. They were still in his tuxedo, standing on the side of a busy road, cars passing by. He didn't care. He started walking. Williams got out of the car. "Where are you going?" "Away from you." "Brandon, wait. Don't." Brandon turned around. His voice was loud now. Loud enough that a few people walking by stopped to look. "Don't follow me. Don't call me. Don't show up at my apartment. We're done." Williams stood there, his hands hanging at his sides. For a moment, he looked lost, broken, but then his expression hardened. "You'll come back to me. You always do." Brandon didn't respond. He just turned and started walking. His dress shoes weren't made for this. They pinched his feet. The tuxedo jacket was too hot in the afternoon sun. But he kept walking, block after block, mile after mile. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he needed to get away from Williams, away from the church, away from everything. Behind him, he heard Williams's car start. It rolled slowly down the street, keeping pace with him. Williams called out the window. "You can't walk away from this, from us, from who you are." Brandon kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't acknowledge him. He just kept moving forward. Eventually, Williams gave up. The car sped off, disappearing around a corner, and Brandon was alone. Would this mark the end of their friendship? Or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous? Brandon woke up the next morning to the sound of his phone buzzing. It wasn't the gentle buzz of a single notification. It was constant, relentless. The kind of buzzing that meant something was very wrong. He reached for his phone on the nightstand and looked at the screen. 47 missed calls, over 100 text messages, voicemails that kept piling up faster than he could delete them. He scrolled through the notifications. Some were from family members. Some were from friends. Some were from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Some of the messages were supportive. Short, awkward texts like, "I'm here if you need to talk," or "praying for you." But most of them weren't supportive. Most of them were harsh, judgmental, mean. One message from a distant cousin said, "I always knew something was off about you." Another from a church member said, "You deceived all of us. How could you stand in front of God and lie like that?" Another simply said, "You're disgusting." Brandon turned off his phone. He couldn't look at it anymore. He sat on the edge of his bed in the same tuxedo he'd worn yesterday. He hadn't changed, hadn't showered, hadn't eaten. He'd just walked into his apartment last night, collapsed on the bed, and stared at the ceiling until he fell asleep. Now it was morning, and nothing had changed. The wedding was still ruined. Kiara was still gone. His life was still destroyed. He needed to talk to her, needed to explain, needed to make her understand that the person in that video wasn't who he was anymore, that he'd changed, that he loved her. He turned his phone back on and called her. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same thing. She'd turned off her phone. He called Daniela next. She answered after 2 rings, but before he could say anything, she spoke. "Don't call this number again." Then she hung up. Brandon sat there, staring at his phone. His chest felt heavy. His throat felt tight. He couldn't just sit here. He had to do something. He had to see her. He changed out of the tuxedo, threw on jeans and a t-shirt, and drove to the Cole house. It was late morning by the time he got there. He parked across the street and walked up to the front door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He could see movement inside through the curtains. Someone was home. They just weren't answering. He knocked a 3rd time. Louder, more insistent. The door opened. But it wasn't Kiara. It wasn't Pastor Job or Daniela. It was Ambrose, Kiara's younger brother. He was 25, tall, with the same serious expression his father always wore. Ambrose stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind him. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at Brandon with this cold, hard stare. "You need to leave," Ambrose finally said. "I just want to talk to her," Brandon said. "Just for 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "She doesn't want to see you. Please, I need to explain." Ambrose stepped closer. His voice was low but firm. "Explain what? That you lied to my sister for 2 years? That you stood in front of our entire family and pretended to be someone you're not?" "I didn't lie about who I am. I just didn't tell her about my past." "That's the same thing," Ambrose said. "You let her believe something that wasn't true. You let all of us believe it. And now she's in the hospital because of you." Brandon's heart dropped. "What?" "She had a panic attack last night. A bad one. We had to call an ambulance. They sedated her." Brandon felt like the ground was falling out from under him. "Is she okay?" "No, she's not okay. She's traumatized, and you need to stay away from her." "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I don't care what you meant," Ambrose said. "You need to leave. Now." Brandon opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Ambrose stepped back inside and shut the door. Brandon heard the lock click. He stood there for a moment staring at the door, Then he turned and walked back to his car. But he didn't drive away. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do next. Then he got another idea. If Kiara was in the hospital, maybe he could see her there. Maybe he could talk to her alone. He drove to the hospital, the same hospital Kiara had been taken to the night before. He parked and walked inside, heading straight for the front desk. "I'm looking for Kiara Cole," he said to the receptionist. "She was admitted last night." The receptionist typed something into her computer. "Are you family?" "I'm her fiancée." The receptionist looked at him for a long moment, like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then she said, "She's in room 304, third floor." Brandon thanked her and headed for the elevators. His heart was pounding. He didn't know what he was going to say. He just knew he had to see her. But when the elevator doors opened on the third floor, he saw Ambrose standing in the hallway. Their eyes met. Ambrose's expression hardened. "You need to leave," Ambrose said, walking toward him. "I just want to see her." "She doesn't want to see you. Let her tell me that herself." Ambrose stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "You're not going in that room." Brandon tried to move past him, but Ambrose grabbed his arm. "I said no." A nurse walked by and stopped. "Is there a problem?" "This man is harassing my family," Ambrose said. "We need security." Brandon's stomach dropped. "I'm not harassing anyone. I just want to talk to her." The nurse pulled out a radio and called for security. 2 guards arrived within minutes. They asked Brandon to leave. He tried to explain, tried to tell them he just needed 5 minutes. But they didn't care. They escorted him out of the hospital. Brandon stood in the parking lot, watching the hospital entrance. He couldn't just leave. Not yet. So he sat down on a bench near the front doors and waited. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. People came and went, families visiting loved ones, patients being discharged. Brandon sat there through all of it, hoping to catch a glimpse of Kiara. As evening approached, the automatic doors slid open and Daniela and Pastor Job stepped out. They walked slowly, both looking exhausted. They saw Brandon immediately. They stopped. Daniela's voice was icy, sharp. "Haven't you done enough?" Brandon stood up. "Please, just let me talk to her." Pastor Job stepped forward. His voice was firm but not angry, just tired. "My daughter is traumatized. You will not see her." "I didn't lie about who I am," Brandon said. His voice cracked. "I lied about who I was." Pastor Job looked at him for a long moment. In the eyes of God, deception is deception. Daniela grabbed her husband's arm. "We're leaving." They walked toward their car. Brandon called after them. "I love her. I never meant to hurt her." They didn't respond. They got in their car and drove away. Brandon sat back down on the bench. The sun set. The parking lot lights came on. He sat there until the security guards told him the hospital was closing visitor hours, and he needed to leave. He drove home in the dark. When he got back to his apartment, he found a letter he'd written the night before. A letter explaining everything. A letter apologizing. A letter begging for a chance to talk. The next day, he drove back to the Cole house and slipped the letter under the door. He waited across the street for an hour, hoping someone would read it and call him. But instead, the door opened, and Daniela walked out. She picked up the letter, looked at it, then walked to the curb and threw it in the trash. Brandon sat in his car and watched, and for the first time since the wedding, he cried. It seemed the damage was too deep to repair. 3 days passed, 3 days of silence, 3 days of Brandon sitting in his apartment, staring at his phone, hoping Kiara would call. She didn't. Then, on the 4th day, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" "It's Pastor Job." Brandon sat up straight. "Pastor Cole, thank you for calling. I'm not calling to hear an apology," Pastor Job interrupted. "I'm calling because I think we need to talk, face to face." "Yes, absolutely, whenever you're available." Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, at the church. Just you and me. I'll be there. The line went dead. Brandon didn't sleep that night. He spent hours rehearsing what he was going to say, how he was going to explain himself, how he was going to convince Pastor Job that he was still the man he thought he was, that his past didn't define him. The next afternoon, Brandon arrived at the church 15 minutes early. The parking lot was empty. The building was quiet. He walked inside and found Pastor Job sitting in the front pew, his Bible open in his lap. Pastor Job looked up when Brandon walked in. He didn't smile, didn't stand, just gestured to the pew across from him. Brandon sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the church was heavy, oppressive. Brandon could hear his own heartbeat. Finally, Brandon spoke. "Thank you for meeting with me." Pastor Job closed his Bible. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because I need to understand. I need to know who you really are. I'm the same person you've known for the past 2 years. Are you?" Pastor Job's voice was calm, but there was pain underneath it. "Because the man I knew didn't have secrets. The man I knew was honest. The man I knew didn't stand in front of God and 300 witnesses and hide the truth." Brandon took a deep breath. "You're right. I wasn't honest. And I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for that, but I want you to understand why." "Then explain." Brandon started from the beginning. He told Pastor Job about his sister getting sick, about struggling to make it in real estate, about needing money fast, about the clubs. He didn't leave anything out. He told him about being bisexual, about Williams, about the relationship they had and how it ended. He talked for 20 minutes straight. Pastor Job listened without interrupting. When Brandon finally finished, the silence returned. Then Pastor Job spoke. "I feel deceived. I officiated a wedding for a man I didn't truly know." "You knew the man I am," Brandon said. "Not the man I was. That life ended 6 years ago. I chose a different path. I chose faith. I chose your daughter. But you didn't choose honesty, because I was afraid of exactly this. Losing everything." Pastor Job leaned back. He looked tired, older than he had a few days ago. "You put my daughter in an impossible position. You let her fall in love with a version of you that wasn't complete. You let her plan a future based on incomplete information. I know, and I hate myself for it. Do you?" Pastor Job's eyes met Brandon's. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you made a choice. You chose to protect yourself instead of trusting her with the truth." Brandon didn't have a response to that, because it was true. Pastor Job stood up. "I'm not the one you need to convince. This decision belongs to my daughter. If she wants to talk to you, that's her choice. But I won't force her, and neither will you." He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "One more thing. If you truly love her, you'll respect whatever decision she makes, even if it's not the one you want." Then he left. Brandon sat alone in the church for another hour. He prayed. He cried. He begged God for a second chance. Then he went home and waited. 2 days later, his phone rang. It was Kiara's cousin. She said Kiara agreed to meet him, but not at the house, not at the church, at a park near her childhood home, neutral ground. Brandon arrived early. He sat on a bench and waited. 20 minutes later, Kiara appeared. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. She looked nothing like the woman he'd seen walking down the aisle just a week ago. She sat down on the bench, but not close to him. She left space between them. She didn't look at him at first, just stared straight ahead. Brandon didn't know how to start, so he just started talking. He told her everything he'd told her father, everything about his past, everything about Williams, everything about why he kept it hidden. He talked for 20 minutes. Kiara listened in silence. When he finally stopped, she took a deep breath. "I forgive you spiritually," she said. Her voice was quiet, tired. Because that's what I'm called to do. Brandon felt a small flicker of hope. Then she continued. But emotionally, I can't continue this. The hope died. I need time to figure out who I am without you, Kiara said. What I want without pressure. Without my family's expectations. Without your apologies. I just need time. How much time? Brandon asked. I don't know. She finally looked at him. Maybe a lot. Maybe forever. I don't know. Brandon nodded. His throat felt tight. I understand. Kiara stood up. I hope you find peace, Brandon. I really do. But I can't be the one to give it to you. She walked away. Brandon watched her go, and this time, he didn't follow. 2 months passed. Brandon threw himself into work. He took on every client who called. He worked open houses on weekends. He stayed late at the office. He did anything to keep his mind occupied, anything to avoid thinking about Kiara. But she was always there, in the back of his mind, in his dreams, in the quiet moments when he was alone. He texted her occasionally, simple messages, nothing demanding, just letting her know he was thinking about her, that he hoped she was doing well, that he was praying for her. Sometimes she responded, short, polite messages. Thank you. I'm okay. I appreciate that. Other times she didn't respond at all. Brandon tried to be patient, tried to give her the space she asked for, but it was killing him. And then he heard the news. Kiara was seeing someone, a guy named King Ford. He was a youth pastor at a neighboring church, someone her family approved of, someone without a complicated past, someone who checked all the boxes. Brandon heard about it from a mutual friend. They'd been spotted together at a church event, then at dinner, then at another event. It was moving fast. Brandon felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He knew he had no right to be upset. He knew he'd caused this, but it didn't make it hurt any less. He wanted to reach out, wanted to tell her he was still here, still waiting, still hoping. But he didn't, because that wasn't fair to her. She'd asked for space, and he was going to give it to her. But Williams didn't let go. Brandon had blocked his number after the confrontation in the car. He'd blocked him on social media. He'd told mutual friends not to share information about him with Williams. He wanted nothing to do with him, but Williams didn't care. The calls started a week after the wedding. Unknown numbers, blocked calls. Brandon never answered, but Williams left voicemails. Long, rambling messages about how Brandon was making a mistake, how Kiara would never accept him, how they belonged together. Then Williams started showing up at Brandon's workplace. He'd walk into the real estate office and ask to speak with him. The first time, Brandon told the receptionist he wasn't available. The second time, he had security escort Williams out. Then, the letters started arriving. Long, handwritten letters filled with declarations of love and anger. One letter said, "You think you can just erase me? I made you. I protected you. You owe me." Brandon read the first few letters, then stopped. He started throwing them away without opening them. When that didn't work, Williams filed a restraining order. He had to go to court, explain the situation, show the judge the letters and voicemails. The judge granted the order. Williams was required to stay at least 500 feet away from Brandon at all times. Williams violated it twice. The first time, Brandon was leaving the grocery store and found Williams sitting in his car in the parking lot. He called the police. Williams was arrested but released a few hours later with a warning. The second time, Williams showed up at Brandon's apartment building. He knocked on the door for 10 minutes, calling Brandon's name. Brandon called the police again. Williams was arrested again. This time, he spent the night in jail. But even that didn't stop him, because Williams' obsession had shifted. He wasn't just focused on Brandon anymore. He was focused on someone else. The question was who? It was a Saturday morning. Brandon was at the gym halfway through his workout when he saw her name on the screen. Kiara. His heart stopped. He almost didn't answer, almost let it go to voicemail because he was afraid of what she might say. But he answered. Hello? Hi. Her voice was soft, tentative. Is this a bad time? No, not at all. Brandon stepped out of the gym into the parking lot. His hands were shaking. How are you? I'm okay. A pause. I was wondering if we could meet. Talk, if you're willing. Of course. When? Today? If that works for you. Brandon looked down at his workout clothes covered in sweat. Yeah, today works. Where? The same park? Where we talked last time. I'll be there in an hour. Brandon drove home, showered, changed, and tried to calm his racing thoughts. He didn't know what this meant. Didn't know if she wanted closure or something else. He told himself not to hope, not to expect anything, but hope crept in anyway. He arrived at the park 20 minutes early, sat on the same bench where they'd last spoken, watched families walking by, kids playing on the playground, couples holding hands, normal people living normal lives. Then he saw her. Kiara walked toward him wearing jeans and a simple white blouse. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders. She looked different, not just physically, though she'd lost weight. She looked lighter somehow, like something heavy had been lifted off her. She sat down next to him, closer than last time, not touching, but close enough that he could smell her perfume. The same one she'd worn on their first date. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Kiara broke the silence. I tried to move on. I tried to love someone else, but my heart kept coming back to you. Brandon's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. I started dating someone, Kiara continued. King Ford. He's a youth pastor at a church near my parents' place. Good man, kind, patient, everything I thought I needed. Brandon nodded. He'd heard about King through mutual friends. Heard they'd gotten engaged. He'd spent weeks trying not to think about it. He proposed after 3 months, Kiara said. And I said yes, because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. Move on. Find someone new. Build a life with someone who didn't have a complicated past. She looked down at her hands. But I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at him, I thought about you. Every time he talked about our future, I wondered what our future would have looked like. Every time he kissed me, I wished it was you. Brandon felt tears building behind his eyes. He didn't let them fall. So I ended it, Kiara said. 2 weeks ago, I called off the engagement, told him I couldn't marry him while I was still in love with someone else. How did he take it? Brandon asked. He was devastated. He cried. Told me he'd invested everything in our relationship, that he saw a future with me, that he'd never loved anyone the way he loved me. She paused, and I believe him. He genuinely loved me. He wanted it to work, but I couldn't give him what he deserved. It wouldn't have been fair to him. Brandon understood that feeling, the weight of loving someone who couldn't love you back fully. I've been in therapy, Kiara said. Working through everything, the wedding, the video, the shame, the anger, all of it. That's good, Brandon said. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. My therapist helped me realize something, Kiara said. She finally looked at him. You made a mistake by hiding your past, but I made a mistake too. I didn't give you a chance to explain. I let my fear and embarrassment make the decision for me instead of actually listening to you. Brandon shook his head. You had every right to be upset. I should have told you from the beginning. Maybe. But I also should have been mature enough to hear you out, to ask questions, to try to understand instead of just shutting you out completely. They sat in silence for a moment. A jogger passed by. A dog barked in the distance. Life kept moving around them. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, Kiara said. I'm not asking you to pretend it didn't hurt, but I'm asking if you're willing to try again. Slowly, honestly, with no more secrets. Brandon turned to look at her fully. Are you sure? Because I can't go through losing you again. I barely survived it the first time. I'm sure, Kiara said. I spent 6 months trying to convince myself I could be happy without you, and I couldn't. So either we try again, or I spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Brandon reached for her hand. She let him take it. Okay, we'll try again. The next few weeks were strange. They moved slowly. Coffee dates, walks in the park, long phone conversations that stretched into the night. They talked about everything. Brandon told her things he'd never told anyone. About his parents' death. About the guilt he carried. About the shame he felt for the choices he made. Kiara told him about the panic attacks she'd had after the wedding. About the nights she couldn't sleep. About the therapy sessions where she cried for an hour straight. They were honest in ways they hadn't been before. Raw. Vulnerable. They told their families. Pastor Job was hesitant but supportive. He said he needed time to trust Brandon again, but he was willing to try. Daniela took longer. She barely spoke to Brandon for the first month, but eventually she softened. She invited them to dinner. She asked Brandon questions about his life now, about his faith, about his intentions. After 3 months, Brandon proposed. Not in front of a crowd this time, just the two of them at the park where they'd reconciled. He got down on one knee and asked if she'd marry him. Kiara said yes. They planned a new wedding, smaller this time, more intimate, just close family and friends. No grand ceremony, no 200 guests, just the people who mattered most. The date was set for December 3rd, 6 months away. Enough time to plan. Enough time to make sure they were both ready. Brandon felt like he could finally breathe again. Like the weight he'd been carrying for 6 months had finally lifted. He had her back. They were going to build the life they'd always planned. Everything was going to be okay. But someone was watching. Williams Bowman learned about the reconciliation through a mutual acquaintance. Someone who'd seen Brandon and Kiara together at a restaurant. Someone who mentioned it casually, not knowing what it would trigger. Williams sat in his apartment and stared at the wall. His chest felt tight. His hands shook. He'd spent 6 months convincing himself that Brandon would eventually come back to him. That once Brandon realized Kiara wasn't right for him, he'd remember what they had. Remember who really understood him. But now they were back together. Planning another wedding. Moving forward like Williams didn't exist. He felt betrayed, used, manipulated. Brandon had led him on for years, made him believe they had something special, then threw him away like he was nothing. And Kiara, she was the problem, the obstacle, the reason Brandon wouldn't come back. Williams had tried to destroy their relationship once. He'd succeeded. But somehow they'd found their way back to each other. Somehow she still had her hooks in him. If the first wedding couldn't break them apart, then he needed to try something else, something permanent. Williams made a decision that night, a decision that would change everything. If he couldn't have Brandon, then no one could. And if Kiara was the reason Brandon wouldn't come back, then Kiara had to go. He spent the next week planning. He couldn't do it himself. He didn't know how. He'd never hurt anyone in his life, but he knew someone who could. Tyree Langston, a guy Williams had met years ago at one of the clubs. Tyree wasn't a performer. He was security, but he also did side jobs, the kind of jobs people didn't talk about openly. Williams had heard stories about people who needed problems handled, about Tyree being the one to handle them. Williams found Tyree's number in an old contact list. He called, left a message. Tyree called back 2 days later. They met at a bar on the south side of Atlanta, the kind of place where people minded their own business, where conversations disappeared into the noise of the jukebox and the clinking of glasses. Williams sat in a corner booth. Tyree slid in across from him. He was bigger than Williams remembered. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, eyes that had seen things Williams couldn't imagine. "What do you need?" Tyree asked. No small talk, no pleasantries. Williams leaned forward. "I need someone handled." Tyree didn't react, just waited. "A woman. She's ruining someone's life. I need her gone." Gone like scared away? Or gone like permanent? Williams hesitated. Then he said, "Permanent." Tyree studied him for a long moment. "That's 20,000. 10 now." 10 after. Williams had the money. He'd been saving for years. Money he'd planned to use to start a business, to build a life. But none of that mattered. Now, the only thing that mattered was getting Brandon back. "It has to look random," Williams said. "Like a robbery. No connection back to me." "That's what you're paying for," Tyree said. "When?" "A week before her wedding. December 3rd. She works at Oak Ridge Elementary. Usually leaves around 4:30. Tyree nodded. "I'll need her photo, her routine, everything you know." Williams pulled out his phone. He had photos, lots of them. He'd been following her on social media using fake accounts. He knew where she lived, where she worked, where she shopped. He'd been watching her for months, telling himself it was just to keep an eye on her, to make sure she wasn't hurting Brandon. But the truth was simpler. He'd been waiting for this moment, planning for it, preparing for the day when he'd finally take action. He showed Tyree the photos, gave him the information. Tyree took notes on his phone. When they were done, Williams handed him an envelope. $10,000 in cash. Tyree counted it quickly, then tucked it into his jacket. "You'll get a call when it's done," Tyree said. Then he stood up and walked out. Williams sat there for another hour. He ordered another drink, then another. He felt numb, not guilty, not scared, just numb. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that this was the only way to save Brandon from making another mistake, that Kiara deserved this for manipulating him. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't about protecting Brandon. This was about possession, about control, about refusing to accept that what they had was over. Williams finished his drink and went home. He marked the date on his calendar. November 27th, 1 week before the wedding. November 27th, a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was clear. The temperature was mild. It was the kind of day that felt ordinary, safe. The kind of day when nothing bad was supposed to happen. Kiara finished her shift at the elementary school at 4:15. She'd spent the last hour helping a student with his reading assignment. The boy struggled with dyslexia, and Kiara had been working with him after school twice a week. Today, he'd read an entire page without stopping. His face lit up with pride. Kiara hugged him and told him she was proud of him. She packed up her bag, said goodbye to the other teachers, and walked out to the parking lot. The lot was mostly empty. Most teachers left right at 4. Kiara usually stayed later, but tonight she wanted to get home. She was meeting Brandon for dinner to finalize honeymoon plans. She pulled out her phone and called him as she walked to her car. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, beautiful," Brandon said. She could hear him smiling through the phone. "Hey yourself," Kiara said. "I'm leaving work now. Should be home in 20 minutes. "Perfect. I already made reservations for 6:30. Where are we going?" "It's a surprise." Kiara laughed. "You know I hate surprises. You'll like this one. Trust me." They talked about the honeymoon. Brandon wanted to go to Jamaica. Kiara wanted the Maldives. They were still debating. Brandon was making an argument for Jamaica when Kiara reached her car. She fumbled with her keys, phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. She was laughing at something Brandon said. She didn't notice the black sedan pulling up behind her. The sedan stopped. 2 men got out. Tyree Langston and his accomplice, Devin Grant. Tyree was the one Williams had hired. Devin was backup, insurance, someone to make sure the job got done. They moved quickly, quietly. Tyree had done this before. He knew how to approach without making noise, knew how to close the distance before the target realized what was happening. Kiara finally got her keys out. She unlocked her car door. She was still on the phone with Brandon, still laughing about something. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Tyree was 5 feet away, gun drawn, pointed at her chest. Kiara's smile disappeared. The phone slipped from her shoulder. She caught it with her hand, but she didn't bring it back to her ear. She just stared at the gun. Brandon's voice came through the phone, tinny and distant. "Kiara, you still there?" Kiara's voice came out as a whisper. "No, please." 3 shots. The first one hit her shoulder. The impact spun her around. She dropped the phone. It clattered on the pavement. The second shot grazed her neck. Blood sprayed. She felt the burn before she felt the pain. The third shot hit her abdomen. She fell. Her knees hit the ground first, then her hands. Then she collapsed completely. Brandon heard it all. The shots. The impact. Kiara's scream cutting off mid-sound. The phone hitting the ground. Then nothing. "Kiara!" Brandon was screaming into the phone. "Kiara, what's happening? Talk to me." No response. He could hear footsteps. Running. A car door slamming. An engine starting. Tires screeching. Then silence. Brandon was already moving. He grabbed his keys and ran to his car. He was still on the phone, still screaming her name. His hands shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. He drove faster than he'd ever driven in his life. He ran red lights. He swerved around cars. He didn't care if he got pulled over. He didn't care about anything except getting to her. Someone else had called 911, a witness in the parking lot. Paramedics arrived 6 minutes after the shooting. They found Kiara lying in a pool of blood. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse was weak. They loaded her onto a stretcher, started an IV, applied pressure to the wounds. They worked fast, professionally, but they knew the clock was ticking. She'd lost a lot of blood, too much blood. The ambulance rushed her to County General Hospital, the same hospital where she'd been taken after the panic attack, the same hospital where Brandon had waited outside for hours hoping to see her. Brandon arrived 15 minutes later. He didn't remember the drive, didn't remember parking. He just remembered running through the hospital doors, covered in sweat, gasping for breath. "Kiara Cole," he said to the receptionist. "She was just brought in, gunshot wounds." The receptionist typed quickly. "She's in surgery, 2nd floor, but you'll have to wait. Family only in the surgical wing." "I'm her fiancé." The receptionist looked at him. Then she nodded. "2nd floor, take the elevator." Brandon ran. He burst through the doors to the surgical wing, found the waiting area. It was empty except for one nurse at the desk. "Kiara Cole," Brandon said. "Where is she?" "She's in surgery," the nurse said gently. "The doctors are doing everything they can." "How bad is it?" The nurse hesitated. 3 gunshot wounds, shoulder, neck, and abdomen. She lost a lot of blood, but she's stable right now. The surgeons are working to remove the bullets. Brandon collapsed into a chair. His whole body shook. His hands were trembling. He put his head in his hands and tried to breathe. He stayed like that for 4 hours. Pastor Job and Daniela arrived an hour into the surgery. They'd gotten a call from the school. They ran into the waiting room, faces pale with fear. When they saw Brandon, Daniela almost collapsed. Pastor Job caught her. They sat together in silence. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. They just waited. Ambrose arrived next. Then Kiara's cousins. Then church members who'd heard the news. The waiting room filled up. People prayed. People cried. People held each other. Brandon sat alone in the corner. He couldn't look at Kiara's family, couldn't face them. This was his fault. If he'd never come into her life, this wouldn't have happened. Williams wouldn't have targeted her. She'd be safe. Finally, after 4 hours, a surgeon came out. She was still in her scrubs, mask pulled down around her neck. Everyone stood up. "She's alive," the surgeon said. "We removed 2 bullets. The third passed through. She's stable, but we've placed her in a medically induced coma to allow her body to heal." "When will she wake up?" Daniela asked. "We're hoping in the next few days, but we'll have to monitor her closely. She lost a significant amount of blood. The next 72 hours are critical." They let families see her one at a time. Pastor Job went first, then Daniela, then Ambrose. Brandon waited. He didn't know if they'd let him see her. He didn't know if he had the right to ask. But then Daniela came out. She walked over to him. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked exhausted, broken. "You can see her," she said quietly. Brandon stood up. Are you sure? She'd want you there. Brandon walked into the ICU. Kiara was in the first room. She was lying in the bed, tubes and wires connected to her body. Machines beeped softly. Her face was pale. The bandage on her neck was stained red. Brandon pulled a chair close to her bed. He took her hand. It was cold. I'm so sorry, he whispered. This is my fault. All of it. Kiara didn't respond. She couldn't. She was unconscious. But Brandon stayed anyway. He held her hand and prayed. He begged God to let her live. He promised he'd do anything. Give up anything. Just let her live. He stayed there all night. The nurses tried to get him to leave, but he refused. He wasn't leaving her side. Kiara remained unconscious for 3 days. The doctors checked on her every few hours. Her vitals were stable. Her body was healing. But she wasn't waking up. Brandon didn't leave the hospital. He slept in the chair next to her bed. Pastor Joe brought him food. Daniela brought him clean clothes, but he barely ate, barely changed. He just sat there holding her hand, waiting. On the 3rd day, Kiara's eyes opened. She was confused at first, disoriented. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. A nurse rushed in and gave her water, adjusted her bed, checked her vitals. Kiara looked around the room. Her eyes landed on Brandon. She tried to smile, but it hurt too much. Instead, she just squeezed his hand. Brandon broke down. He put his head on the side of her bed and sobbed. Relief, guilt, fear, all of it came pouring out. You're okay, he kept saying. You're okay. Kiara's voice was barely a whisper. What happened? Someone shot you, Brandon said, in the school parking lot. Who? We don't know yet. The police are investigating. But even as he said it, Brandon knew. Deep down, he knew exactly who was responsible. Detective Lorna Mitchell was assigned to the case the same night Kiara was shot. She was a 15-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department. She'd worked hundreds of violent crimes, robberies, assaults, homicides. She'd seen the worst of what people could do to each other. But this case felt different from the start. She arrived at the elementary an hour after the shooting. The parking lot was taped off. Crime scene techs were collecting evidence. Shell casings, blood samples, tire marks. Witnesses were being interviewed in the school building. Detective Mitchell walked the scene. She studied the positioning. The shooter had approached from behind, fired 3 times, then fled. No witnesses got a good look at the car. No one got a plate number. It happened too fast. She went to the hospital to interview Kiara, but the doctors said she was in surgery. So Mitchell started building a profile. Kiara Cole, 27 years old, elementary school teacher, pastor's daughter, engaged to Brandon Nash, no criminal record, no known enemies. By all accounts, she was a good person living a normal life. Mitchell's initial theory was a random robbery gone wrong. Someone saw a woman alone in a parking lot and decided to make a move. But the more she dug, the less that theory made sense. Nothing was stolen. Kiara's purse was still in her car. Her phone was on the ground next to her. Her wallet was untouched. If this was a robbery, why didn't the shooter take anything? And the timing was strange. 4:30 in the afternoon. Still daylight. Plenty of potential witnesses. That's not when robberies happen. Robberies happen at night, in dark alleys, in empty parking garages, not in broad daylight at a school. Mitchell started looking at other possibilities. She pulled Kiara's phone records, went through her social media, talked to her coworkers, her family, her friends. She was looking for anything that didn't fit, any conflict, any threat, any reason someone would want her dead. That's when the suspect list started forming. The first name that came up was King Ford, Kiara's ex-fiancé. They'd been engaged for 3 months before she called it off. Mitchell tracked him down and brought him in for questioning. King was 29 years old, youth pastor at a church in Decatur. He came in voluntarily, sat down in the interview room and answered every question without hesitation. When's the last time you spoke to Kiara? Mitchell asked. About 2 weeks ago, King said. She called to check on me, make sure I was okay. And were you? Okay? King's face tightened. No, I wasn't okay. I loved her. I wanted to marry her, and she ended it because she was still in love with someone else. Were you angry about that? I was hurt, devastated, but not angry. Not at her. She was honest with me. She didn't lead me on. She ended it as soon as she realized she couldn't go through with it. Mitchell watched his body language. He wasn't defensive, wasn't evasive, just sad. Where were you on November 27th around 4:30 p.m.? At the church, leading a youth group meeting. We had about 15 kids there. You can check with any of them. Mitchell did check. King's alibi was solid. 15 teenagers and 2 other church staff confirmed he was there the entire afternoon. King Ford was eliminated as a suspect. The second name on the list was Brandon Nash, Kiara's fiancé. Mitchell knew from experience that significant others were always suspects in cases like this. She looked into Brandon's finances, checked if there were any insurance policies on Kiara, any debts, any motive. But Brandon had nothing to gain from Kiara's death. No insurance policy, no financial benefit, and more importantly, he was on the phone with her when she was shot. Mitchell listened to the 911 call, heard Brandon screaming in the background, heard the raw panic in his voice. That wasn't acting. That was genuine terror. Brandon Nash was eliminated as a suspect. The third name came up through interviews with Kiara's co-workers, Principal Gerald Moss. Kiara had filed a complaint against him 8 months earlier for inappropriate behavior. He'd made comments about her appearance, stood too close to her during meetings, sent her texts that crossed professional boundaries. An internal investigation had been conducted. Moss received a formal reprimand and was required to attend sensitivity training. He'd been hostile toward Kiara ever since. Mitchell brought him in. Moss was 53 years old, married, 2 kids. He sat in the interview room with his arms crossed, angry at being questioned. I had nothing to do with this, Moss said. I've been dealing with the fallout from that complaint for months. The last thing I need is more drama. Where were you on November 27th? At home. My wife can confirm. Mitchell checked. His wife confirmed he was home. But spouses lie. Mitchell dug deeper. She pulled traffic camera footage from the route between Moss's house and the school. His car never left his neighborhood that afternoon. Gerald Moss was eliminated as a suspect. Mitchell hit a wall. 3 suspects. 3 dead ends. She went back to Kiara's phone records and started going through them line by line. That's when she found it. A text message sent 2 days before the shooting. From a number Kiara didn't have saved in her contacts. The message was short. Just 5 words. You don't deserve him. Mitchell traced the number. It was a burner phone, purchased at a gas station in southwest Atlanta 3 weeks before the shooting. She pulled the security footage from the gas station, and there he was, Williams Bowman. Mitchell ran his name, pulled his background, discovered the restraining order Brandon had filed against him, the violations, the obsessive behavior, the letters. She brought Williams in for questioning. Williams arrived with a lawyer. He sat in the interview room looking calm. Too calm, like someone who'd been preparing for this moment. When's the last time you spoke to Brandon Nash? Mitchell asked. Months ago, Williams said. We had a falling out. What kind of falling out? Personal. It's not relevant. Mitchell leaned forward. A woman was shot 3 times, nearly died, and you sent her a threatening text 2 days before it happened. I'd say that's pretty relevant. Williams didn't react. I didn't send any text. We have footage of you buying the burner phone. Doesn't mean I sent anything. Mitchell changed tactics. Why do you think Brandon filed a restraining order against you? Williams's jaw tightened. Because he's confused. He's being manipulated by that woman. Kiara? Yes. You don't like her very much, do you? I don't know her. But you blame her for your relationship with Brandon ending. William's lawyer put a hand on his arm. Don't answer that. Mitchell kept pushing. You've been following her, watching her, texting her, and then someone tries to kill her. That's not a coincidence. I want my lawyer present for any further questions, Williams said. The interview ended. But Mitchell had enough. She got a warrant for Williams's bank records. And that's when the case broke wide open. Williams had withdrawn $10,000 in cash 3 weeks before the shooting. Multiple withdrawals. Small amounts. Clearly trying not to raise suspicion. Mitchell put the word out on the street. She needed to find whoever Williams had hired. She worked with informants, offered deals, pushed every contact she had. 2 days later, she got a name. Tyree Langston. Tyree was brought in. He had a record. Assault. Armed robbery. He'd done time. He was currently on parole. Mitchell offered him a deal. Testify against whoever hired you, and we'll reduce your charges. Stay quiet, and you're looking at life. Tyree took the deal. He identified Williams as the man who hired him. He provided text messages, meeting locations. He even had a photo on his phone. Williams handing him an envelope of cash at a bar. Devin Grant, Tyree's accomplice, was arrested next. He corroborated everything, gave up every detail, said Williams paid them to kill Kiara, said it had to look random, said Williams wanted her gone so Brandon would come back to him. On December 1st, 2 days before the wedding, Detective Mitchell arrested Williams Bowman at his apartment. He didn't resist, didn't run, just stood there as they read him his rights. He was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, attempted murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages, bank records, witness testimony, photos. Williams was held without bail. The trial began 4 months later, April 13th. The courthouse was packed. Media crews lined the street. This wasn't just a local story anymore. It had gone national. The wedding video, the obsession, the attempted murder. People were fascinated by it. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Monica Reeves. She was known for being tough, relentless. She didn't lose cases, and she wasn't about to start now. Williams's defense attorney was a man named Carl Jennings. He specialized in impossible cases. Cases where the evidence was stacked against his client, and he had to find a way to create reasonable doubt. The jury was selected, 12 people who would decide Williams's fate. They sat in the jury box looking serious, aware of the weight of what they were about to hear. The prosecution presented its case first. They showed the text message Williams sent to Kiara. They presented the security footage of him buying the burner phone. They showed the bank records, the cash withdrawals. They brought in Tyree Langston, who testified that Williams hired him to kill Kiara. They brought in Devin Grant, who confirmed everything Tyree said. The evidence was damning, undeniable. There was no way to explain it away. The defense tried. Jennings argued that obsession doesn't equal intent. He said Williams was mentally unstable, that he'd been struggling with rejection and abandonment issues his entire life, that he made poor decisions but never actually intended for anyone to die. He argued that Tyree and Devin acted on their own, that Williams gave them money, yes, but not to kill anyone, maybe to scare her, maybe to deliver a message, but not to kill. The prosecution tore that argument apart. They showed text messages between Williams and Tyree, where Williams explicitly said he wanted Kiara gone. They showed more messages where Williams asked if it would look random. They showed a photo Williams had sent to Tyree, a photo of Kiara leaving the school, with a caption that said, "This is the target." There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. Williams had hired someone to kill Kiara Cole, and he'd almost succeeded. Then Kiara took the stand. She walked slowly to the witness box. She still had a cane. Her shoulder was still healing. The scar on her neck was visible even from across the courtroom. She sat down, took a deep breath, and told her story. She described the day of the shooting, talking to Brandon on the phone, walking to her car, hearing footsteps behind her, turning around and seeing the gun. She described the fear, the way time seemed to slow down, the way she knew she was about to die. She described waking up in the hospital, the pain, the confusion, the realization that someone had tried to kill her. Then she looked directly at Williams. He stared back. No emotion, no remorse, just blank. "I never did anything to you," Kiara said. Her voice was steady, strong. "I only loved the same man you did, and you tried to kill me for it." Williams didn't react, just kept staring. The defense tried to cross-examine her, tried to suggest she was embellishing, tried to poke holes in her testimony. But there were no holes. Her story was consistent, detailed, true. Closing arguments came next. The prosecution went first. Monica Reeves stood in front of the jury and laid it out simply. "This is not a complicated case," she said. "Williams Bowman hired two men to murder Kiara Cole. He paid them $10,000. He provided them with her photo, her schedule, her location. And those men followed through. They shot her 3 times. They left her to die in a parking lot. The only reason she's alive today is because paramedics arrived in time. That's not attempted murder. That's premeditated murder that, by sheer luck, didn't succeed." The defense gave their closing. Jennings tried one last time to create doubt, but it was weak. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, attempted murder. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Williams stood before the judge. Kiara and Brandon sat in the front row. Pastor Job and Daniela sat behind them. The judge spoke. "Mr. Bowman, you orchestrated a plan to end the life of an innocent woman. You hired criminals to carry out your obsession. You showed no remorse, no regard for human life. The court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." Williams didn't react, just stood there, expressionless. As the guards came to take him away, Williams turned and looked at Brandon. He spoke loud, enough for everyone to hear. "You'll regret this. You'll realize I was the only one who ever truly loved you." Brandon didn't respond. He just held Kiara's hand tighter. Williams was led away. The courtroom emptied, and for the first time in months, Brandon and Kiara could finally breathe. While Kiara was still in the hospital recovering, Brandon made a decision. He couldn't wait anymore. He couldn't risk losing her again. Life was too short, too fragile, too unpredictable. He asked the hospital chaplain to marry them. The chaplain was an older man named Reverend Thomas. He'd been visiting Kiara regularly, praying with her, offering comfort. When Brandon approached him with the request, Reverend Thomas smiled. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything," Brandon said. They gathered the families, Pastor Job and Daniela, Ambrose, Kiara's cousins. Brandon didn't have much family, but the Coles had become his family. They assembled in Kiara's hospital room. She was sitting up in bed, still hooked up to machines, still bandaged, still healing. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Reverend Thomas stood at the foot of her bed. Brandon stood beside her, holding her hand. No tuxedo this time, just jeans and a t-shirt. Kiara wore a hospital gown, no wedding dress, no makeup, no flowers, but it was perfect. Reverend Thomas kept it simple. He talked about love, about commitment, about surviving the unthinkable. He asked Brandon if he took Kiara to be his wife. Brandon said, "I do," with tears streaming down his face. He asked Kiara if she took Brandon to be her husband. She said, "I do," her voice weak but certain. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Brandon leaned down and kissed her gently, careful not to hurt her, careful not to press too hard against her injuries. But it was a real kiss, a married kiss. The room erupted in applause. Daniela cried. Pastor Job hugged Brandon. Ambrose shook his hand. They were married, finally, quietly, completely. 1 year later, Kiara gave birth to a daughter. They named her Grace Elise Nash. Grace for the grace that saved Kiara's life. Elise after Brandon's mother. Grace was born healthy, 8 pounds, full head of hair, She had Kiara's eyes and Brandon's smile. She was perfect. Brandon held her in the hospital and cried. Not from sadness, from relief, from joy, from the overwhelming realization that they'd made it. They'd survived. They'd built something beautiful out of something broken. They moved to a new city, Charlotte, North Carolina, far away from Atlanta, far away from the memories, far away from the people who knew their story. They bought a house, a small 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. They painted the nursery yellow. They planted a garden in the backyard. They built a life. Brandon got a job at a real estate firm. Kiara took a year off to stay home with Grace. They went to church on Sundays. They had neighbors over for dinner. They lived a normal, quiet, happy life. The scars were still there, physical and emotional. Kiara still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched when she heard loud noises. Brandon still felt guilt, still wondered if things could have been different. But they were together, and that was enough. On Grace's first birthday, they took a family photo. All 3 of them, smiling, whole, free. Brandon looked at that photo and thought about everything they'd been through, everything they'd survived, everything they'd overcome. And he realized something. Love isn't about perfection. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about choosing each other even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when it would be easier to walk away. They'd chosen each other, and they'd keep choosing each other every single day. What does it take to survive when someone's love for you becomes your greatest threat? Before moving on, a quick thank you to everyone watching and supporting this channel. Your presence truly keeps it alive. This community continues to grow because of people who believe in real, meaningful storytelling. Becoming a channel member unlocks exclusive extras, behind-the-scenes content, and directly helps us bring more powerful true stories to light. Your support makes a real difference, and we'd love to know who's here. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. If you're still tuned in right now, write "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's watching till the end. Don't forget to like this video too. Now, let's continue. Williams Bowman is now 34 years old. He's serving a life sentence at a maximum security prison in Georgia. He'll never see the outside world again. His obsession cost him everything. His freedom, his reputation, his humanity. He doesn't receive visitors, doesn't get letters. He sits in his cell alone and thinks about Brandon. Still, even now, even after everything. Brandon and Kiara refuse to let his hatred define them. They built a life anyway. Not because the trauma disappeared. It didn't. But because love proved stronger than the man who tried to destroy it. This case reveals a terrifying truth. The most dangerous person in your life isn't always a stranger breaking into your home. Sometimes it's the one who claims to know you best, the one who says they love you, the one who can't accept that love has limits. If you or someone you know is experiencing obsessive behavior from a former partner or friend, reach out, speak up, tell someone, because silence protects the obsessed, not the victim. This channel dives deep into the cases that expose the darkest parts of human nature, not to sensationalize, not to exploit, but to understand, to learn, to protect. If this story gripped you, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who loves true crime as much as you do. Every week we bring you stories that matter, stories that haunt, stories that remind us that love can heal, but obsession destroys. What case should we cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. We read every single one. And remember, stay safe, stay aware. Never ignore the red flags, because sometimes the person who says they love you is the one you need to run from. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next investigation.